In 3CX's own words, we now have a clear overall understanding of the attack, patching 8 security flaws, having out-of-bounds memory access. There was a high CVE, the macOS had a backdoor. It's more than just info stealing, cybercrime that's related to the North Korean funded attacks. Mandiant's investigation is still ongoing, however. We now know a lot more. We know the way that this came in, and we're going to dive into that. So we can see here that 3CX has released their security update on Thursday, the 20th of April of this year, with the initial intrusion vector found. So Mandiant has identified the source of the internal network compromise. Mandiant identified the source of our internal network compromise beginning in 2022 when an employee installed the Trading Technologies X-Trader software. Their installer, which was installed on one of 3CX's employees' personal computers, was Trojanized. It goes on to say that the installation software was downloaded from Trading Technologies' website. It contained veiled signal malware, which enabled the threat actor, identified as UNC 4736, to initially compromise and maintain persistence on the employee's personal computer. Even though the X-Trader software was reportedly retired in 2020 by Trading Technologies, the software was still available for download on their website. The code signing certificate used to digitally sign the malicious software was set to expire in October of 2022. Since the signing certificate was due to be expired in October of 2022, that suggests to us that the X-Trader software was installed prior to that date. So this has been in the works since October of 2022, last year. What does that say about how long it went undetected, how long this threat actor had access or backdoor, which we'll go into further, to 3CX's network? So following the initial download of the veiled signal malware on the employee's computer, Mandiant assessed that the threat actor stole the employee's 3CX corporate credentials from his system, and that the malware provided the threat actor with administrator level access and persistence to the compromised system. They had a backdoor and they had access into the corporate network. They say that the earliest evidence of the compromise uncovered within 3CX's corporate environment occurred through the VPN using those credentials that were on that personal computer 2 days after the employee's personal computer was compromised. Just to lay that out, the employee of 3CX has a personal computer, goes to Trading Technologies, installs a malware installer that had been since reported to be discontinued by Trading Technologies in 2020, but still there, then proceeds to have their VPN credentials that gives access to the corporate environment breached, and then the threat actor has the next means. Now, I make note here that 3CX doesn't give us an exact timeline. They just say 2 days after the employee's personal computer was compromised. They don't mention when. However, earlier they had said that this Trojanized installer from Trading Technologies had a signed certificate to expire in October of 2022, giving us a sort of rough estimate that it was around that time. Mandiant also identified the use of fast reverse proxy tool, which they have a GitHub link to, which the threat actor used to move laterally once within the 3CX environment. The tool was named msmpeng.exe and was located in the System32 directory of Windows. Obfuscating it a little bit. But following that they had that information, Mandiant went on to reconstruct the threat actor's steps through the environment. As they had harvested the credentials and moved laterally, eventually the threat actor was able to compromise both the Windows and Mac OS build environments. So that's the Electron app that we saw. And as we initially thought, it might have been an Electron side of open source threat or supply chain attack. It wasn't. It was through this means of a personal employee's computer that gained access to the network. So now the threat actor is in the network and has access to the Windows and macOS build environments. It's worth noting here also that in Bleeping Computer's article that's covering this new update, they talk about the fact that Nick Galea, the CEO of 3CX, also said after the attack was initially disclosed that it might have been an FFmpeg binary that was used by 3CX that was the entry for the threat actor, and we can actually see links to the original tweets. We're still getting to the bottom of this. It is the FFmpeg library, but we are not sure if it was compromised before we downloaded it or whether it happened on our network, so we don't want to point fingers. We have hired Mandiant and are committed to be fully transparent. Can't fully out Nick Galea here. He was trying to give an answer early on. However, again, not the Electron open source side of things, not FFmpeg, as we can see from this response from FFmpeg. There have been several incorrect reports that FFmpeg has been involved in the distribution of malware. FFmpeg only provides source code, and the source code has not been compromised. Any ffmpeg.dll that's been compromised is responsibility of the vendor. So we can see, again, not Electron, not FFmpeg, as we might have initially thought, but a trading technologies website and a installer that was meant to be discontinued. Here's Mandiant's report. They've given a blog version of it, and they've given us more information than the 3CX security update. Their introduction is really important, especially this last sentence. It's a sentence that we're going to live to remember. It says, "This is the first time Mandiant has seen a software supply chain attack lead to another software supply chain attack." 3CX touched on this, but they didn't really go into depth about it. They talk about how the trading technologies installer was a malware trojanized that then gave access to the threat actor that then created a malware trojanized installer. But they don't really say it as it is, which is the fact that it's a supply chain attack on top of a supply chain attack, which Mandiant is saying it's the first time they've seen. So you can see here, this is their map that they put in their introduction. And it shows the initial threat, the UNC 4736, compromising the trading technologies installer Xtrader software package, which is then installed by a 3CX employee on their personal computer, as well as possibly other victims. And then from there, we have the compromised Windows and Mac OS builds of 3CX desktop app and the victims underneath that. This is Mandiant's explanation of what happened. They say, although the Xtrader platform was reportedly discontinued in 2020, it was still available for download from the Legitimate Trading Technologies website in 2022. This file was signed with the subject Trading Technologies International Incorporated and contained the executable file setup.exe, which was also signed with the same digital certificate. The code signing certificate used to digitally sign the malicious software was set to expire in October of 2022. The installer contains and executes setup.exe, which drops 2 trojanized DLLs and a benign executable. Setup.exe uses the benign executable to sideload one of the malicious DLLs. Sideloading relies on the legitimate Windows executables to load and execute a malicious file that has been disguised as a legitimate dependency. The loaded malicious DLLs contain and uses SIGFlip and DaveShell to decrypt and load the payload in memory from the other dropped malicious executable. SIGFlip relies on RC4 stream cipher to decrypt the payload of choice and uses the byte sequence feedface to find the shellcode. In this case, DaveShell, during the decryption stage. There are so many steps in this. So they say SIGFlip and DaveShell extract and execute a modular backdoor, veiled signal, and 2 corresponding modules. Veiled signal relies on 2 extracted modules for process, injection, and communications with the command and control C2 server. If you're overwhelmed with what has just been said, so are we. It's amazing. It's awful and amazing. The fact that a threat actor can have that many steps to a compromise before even getting to the connection of a C2 is just absurd. They're exploiting on top of exploiting to then lead to an encryption that then leads to instructions, that then leads to a C2 connection. crazy. And we saw this in the 3CX desktop app being Trojanized, that we had DLL side loading, and then that would reach out to an encrypted copy of instructions that would then reach out to a GitHub repo of icons, and in those icons you'd have your connection details to the C2 server, and that would then reach out to that. So many extra steps than what you would initially think. Now this is the really important portion of their report. They say the compromised Xtrader and 3CX desktop app applications both contain, extract and run a payload in the same way, although the final payload is different. So that's coming back to that initial introductory throwaway statement of this is a supply chain on top of a supply chain attack. You're having a Trojanized installer that's put on trading technologies that then gets installed, gives them a connection to 3CX environment, where they then Trojanize the next installer in a very similar way with a different payload. Now going back to how the threat actor moved laterally once they were inside 3CX corporate environment. Mandiant is saying here that the attacker used a compiled version of the publicly available fast reverse proxy project to move laterally within the organization during the attack. The attacker was able to compromise both the Windows and Mac OS build environments. On the Windows build environment, the attacker deployed Taxhall and Coldcat and used DLL sideloading, which we have gone through in our previous video to this part 2. Where we get a bit more information is on the Mac OS side. They say that the Mac OS build server was compromised with Pullrat. This is the first time we're hearing that name. Backdoor using launch daemons as a persistence mechanism. Previously, they had reported that the Mac OS build server was compromised with SimpleC, and this was the name that we had been talking about previously. However, Mandiant Intelligence completed analysis on the sample and determined that the backdoor Pullrat instead for a new name, malware family. So previously they were saying we are naming it SimpleC, and we are seeing if this correlates with any previously known malware or known malware family. However, it is a new malware family and they are naming it Pullrat. So we get a lot of information from Mandiant's blog post here, and if you want to go and check it out yourself, we'll have a link in the description. They go over even a lot more in depth about what they found, especially when it comes to the Pullrat side of things, the Mac OS side. We won't be going over that in this video. Now on Bleeping Computer's website, they've got an article out already about more information regarding the 3CX hack caused by trading software and the supply chain attack, so the information we know now. And I wanted to mention their article because they get a bit of insider information from an interview of one of Mandiant's people that we don't see on the other sources. So where the information is important is when they're talking about the idea of how there is a supply chain on top of a supply chain, and that the trading technologies was attacked and the implications of that. So we can see here that Mandiant's consultant CTO Charles Carmichael told Bleeping Computer, "We suspect there are a number of organizations that don't yet know they are compromised." I just want to pause there to really show the importance of that statement. To give a bit of context to that statement, Bleeping Computer writes in their introduction, "An investigation into last month's 3CX supply chain attack discovered it was caused by another supply chain attack compromise where suspected North Korean attackers breached the site of stock trading automation company Trading Technologies to push Trojanized software builds." Again, Charles Carmichael, CTO of Mandiant Consulting, says, "We suspect there are a number of organizations that don't yet know they are compromised." He goes on to say, "We're hopeful that once we get the information out, it'll help accelerate the process of companies to determine that they are compromised and contain their incidents." We only know, and what's in the news and what we're all talking about and speculating about, is 3CX supply chain attack. But now we know there's a supply chain attack above that in Trading Technologies, and that the installer was available to be installed, run on anyone's computer up until around October of 2022. So now with the information we know about the fact that the threat actor could have well had a foothold in 3CX corporate network environment from as early as October of 2022, it changes things a bit and it makes the timeline look a little bit blurry. We can no longer think that it just started in March of this year and that was it. But it could have been a lot earlier. It definitely was a lot earlier. We've got this great piece here from ESET, who has released a blog post since then talking about how the threat actor Lazarus had a lot of other sort of malware that was running along the side for the Linux and Mac environment, and that they believe coincides with the 3CX supply chain attack. And they've got a timeline here of what happened. So they got the first commit to the GitHub repos that were used as the dead drop resolver for the C2 connection on the 7th of the 12th of 2022. They've got the compromised 3CX desktop app for macOS being signed on the 23rd of the 1st this year, and the second stage payload for the update agent seen to be distributed to macOS victims on the 28th of the 2nd of this year, and the compromised desktop app for Windows being distributed on the 8th of the 3rd this year. The Linux downloader being first uploaded to VirusTotal on the 20th of the 3rd, 2022. This is something that isn't necessarily been related to the 3CX supply chain attack. However, ESET here is saying that it is likely related to the Lazarus threat actor. And then lastly, CrowdStrike post information about the incident on Reddit on the 29th of the 3rd, 2023. Going back to Nick Galia's initial post, he says that they were originally notified of this threat on the 29th of the 3rd, give or take 1 or 2 days of this year. So we can see that this timeline really stretches a lot earlier than that date, and even earlier than what we initially saw. We saw Sentinel-1 picking up the malicious installer as early as the 22nd of the 3rd this year. However, ESET is suggesting here that the compromised desktop app for Windows was distributed as early as the 8th of the 3rd. They write, the timeline shows that the perpetrators had planned the attack long before execution, as early as December 2022. This suggests they already had a foothold inside 3CX network late last year, while the Trojanized 3CX Mac OS application shows it was signed in late January. We do not see the bad application in telemetry until February the 14th. It is unclear whether the malicious update for Mac OS was distributed prior to that date. They make a little note here that although ESET telemetry shows the existence of the macOS second stage payload as early as February, they don't have the sample itself, nor the metadata to tip us off about the maliciousness of, or the malicious nature of this payload. However, they include this information to help the defenders determine how far back the systems might have been compromised. ESET goes on to explain in this article how several days before the attack was publicly revealed, a mysterious Linux downloader was submitted to VirusTotal and its links to the threat actor Lazarus. So with all that said, we're looking at a big attack. We're looking first and foremost at a supply chain attack that infiltrates the trading technologies software, and then that gets installed by this person being an employee of 3CX with their personal computer, that being the entry point in which the threat actors use to then get into 3CX's corporate environment through the VPN connection. Then from there they get to the builds of the Windows and Mac desktop app, and from there create a supply chain attack where they Trojanize the installer. The updates are pushed out. They're using DLL sideloading. They're using Coldcat. They're using all these means to obfuscate themselves and then to reach out to that GitHub repo that then reaches out to those domains for the C2 connection. That's a lot. And as far as ESET is suggesting, they could have been pushing out these Trojanized installers earlier than what we know, earlier than the 29th of March. They definitely had a connection as early as October of 2022 last year. What they did with that connection, we know to a degree. We know what Mandiant is telling us. We know what 3CX is reporting about it. However, there might be more that we learn from this. It's worth leading with the CTO of Mandiant Consulting's own words that he has given to Bleeping Computer. They say, "We suspect there are a number of organizations that don't yet know they're compromised. We're hopeful that once we get this information out, it'll help accelerate the process of companies to determine that they are compromised and contain their incidents." We too hope that by giving this video and by sharing this information and making it more digestible, consolidating a few different articles, that when the information gets out, it can accelerate the awareness that this is a supply chain attack on top of a supply chain attack, and it could affect more parties. As always, my name is Jordan Albaladejo. I am the owner and lead engineer at Ingest Services. We are a managed security service provider. If you need help, please feel free to contact us. We'd be happy to help you in the business side of cybersecurity and getting your systems managed. Thanks so much for watching.